Hi, and welcome to another webinar by InsideBE. I hope you can all hear me, you can all see me. Please let me know in the chat window if everything's fine, if the technology is working. In the previous webinars, you had the chance to see Sam Tatum, the Behavioral Strategy Director at Ogilvy, talking about some of their case studies. Last time it was Torben Emmeling's tour, and he spoke about behavioral insights for strategy. And today we have a very special guest who will talk about an amazing case study, an amazing project for a global telecommunications firm. And he worked on the project with the famous Dan Ariely. And please let me welcome Tim Houlihan. Tim, hello, welcome. Thanks for being here.
It is my pleasure, Matej. Thank you for having me.
And so for all of you folks out there to know who Tim is, Tim has a long history and a lot of experience with behavioral science, with behavioral insights, with behavioral economics. He's now consulting for businesses. He founded consultancy, BehaviorAlchemy. And we'll talk about that just in a second. But besides being a consultant and a truly great person, as I got to know him, Tim also has a podcast, Behavioral Grooves. And the podcast was named as the best behavioral podcast by Psychology Today and Habit Weekly as well. So Tim, congrats on that. How did you manage to get this win?
Just good luck.
Just good luck.
My co-host Kurt Nelson and I love what we do. We absolutely love it. We do it with passion, and we are grateful for the accolades. But we're not doing it for the sake of accolades. We're doing it because we think it's important to bring applied behavioral sciences to a broader audience and to expand the community of people listening all around the world.
And I think we're on the same page there, and that's basically why we're doing all these webinars, to show all of you out there that behavioral economics is not just theory. It's not just something from academic textbooks. It's something that you can take and apply into your work, into your life. But back to you, Tim. So what kind of projects you work most often on, or what kind of clients you most often work with?
Most of my clients are split between two primary groups: larger multinational corporations that have issues with their employees. They have challenges with change management or employee relationships. Sometimes it could be in the realm of psychological safety. Sometimes it's in the realm of just communication, and then. Another group that I work with are nonprofit or pro-social organizations, oftentimes mostly based in the U.S. and struggling with their community or how to communicate with their constituents. And so oftentimes it's a constituency or a policy issue that I work with them on, and it all boils down to the why we do what we do. It always comes back to, right? I mean, this is the ultimate question that we always ask, is why do we do what we do? And then to try to understand from an understanding of why we do what we do, then we can actually design solutions that are going to help make those behavior changes or change the environment in such a way that is more conducive for people.
I know you've been quite busy in the past weeks. So what have you been working on? An interesting project you can tell us more about?
A couple, yes. One with a client in India on the development of a certification program. They actually want to expand their own knowledge and expertise in the realm of applied behavioral sciences, and so we're working on a certification program for their markets in India, which is fantastic, right? It's a bunch of very, very bright people who are very focused on helping not just their own company become better at the application of behavioral science, but also their first ring clients, their prospects, and then pro-social organizations in their communities become better at applying behavioral science. It's a very cool project to be working on. And then the other, and so that's that's kind of a for-profit gig. Then in the pro-social world, working on a project with a company based right here in Minneapolis, Minnesota, where I live. And they're trying to help figure out why the training programs that they have been doing for many years through COVID were less attended, when it's and their training programs lead people who are coming from incarceration into good paying jobs, and they're struggling with lower attendance and lower completion rates. And so we're just getting involved in that right now. So it's pretty fascinating, really.
Wow, this actually sounds really fascinating, and I hope you'll have some nice results out of this collaboration, and you'll be able to share them, because this sounds really interesting.
Yeah, I'd be happy
by
to.
the way, sorry, Tim. By the way, guys, my colleagues will share links to Tim's LinkedIn, so that you can just click on the link and follow Tim for more insights, for more info. They have also posted the link to his podcast, so make sure to tune in. It comes out once a week or once in 2 weeks.
Yeah, every week on Sundays, we publish every Sunday, and then we have bonus episodes occasionally once or twice a month that come out on Wednesdays. Yeah, with new interviews with great behavioral scientists. We've got a fabulous lineup coming up. Oh man, we've just got, like, the next 2 months are just going to be jam-packed with fantastic interviews. Really, it's going to be very cool.
Well, give us a teaser. So who do you have in the pipeline?
Well, I mean, interviews coming up. We're going to be talking to Katie Milkman about her new book, which she is absolutely one of the most productive and intelligent people in the world. She's just absolutely amazing. We're going to be talking to Professor Richard Nisbet, one of the founders of modern psychology today, about his memoir. And we just talked just on Friday of this past week. We talked to Olivier Sibonnet about noise and this new book, which is just hitting the market now, and just fantastic interviews. Honestly, yeah, we're super excited. It's really great. Like, we feel so excited to have these conversations. It's pretty great.
Well, that's what I call a lineup. But Tim, let's get to your presentation. So tell us a little bit more about what you will be talking about, and then I will leave the floor for you. Just before I let you answer that, just want to let you know how this whole webinar will look like. So right now it will be Tim's time to shine. So his presentation about a case study, he'll just tell us more about in a second. And after he's done, we'll open it for a Q&A session. So please keep your questions for a little bit later, and you'll be able to write them in the chat window. We'll take them one by one, and I hope Tim will be more than happy to answer them. So Tim, what is it that you'll talk about?
Well, I'm going to talk about a case study that I did with a global telecommunications firm, and I was fortunate enough to get Dan Ariely and Francesca Gino to partner with me as my academic third-party objective partners on this. And Francesca was, at the time, she was at Chapel Hill University. She is now at Harvard Business School. And Dan had recently moved from MIT to Duke. And we were trying to discover, would there be a difference in the way call center employees performed? Would their output and their results be different if we gave them different kinds of rewards? Because there was a culture that was used to using cash, using money to reward and incent their employees. And what if we asked them to set their own goals? What if we gave them an opportunity to actually create goals for themselves? And how would that impact performance? So we studied those two things at the same time, and that's really the focus of the conversation today.
So Tim, looking forward. The floor is yours, and I'm turning myself off for the time being.
Oh, look forward to reconnecting here, Matej. So thank you to everyone for joining, and as I was just saying, the setup is comes from a large global telecommunications firm. But first, since we're talking about goals and rewards, I think it might be worth talking just a little bit about the fundamentals of asking, do rewards matter? Does extrinsic motivation matter in the world of especially of employee performance? And I wanted to bring up a wonderful study that was done by Sebastian Georg from the Planck Institute, and he wanted to see whether or not these three different conditions of people being rewarded with cash, people being rewarded with utilitarian rewards. He actually used a very simple utilitarian water bottle, and with a hedonic award, or something that might bring pleasure to you but is completely luxurious, and we would very rarely spend our own money on something like a piece of origami. As was the case. And the way that Sebastian and his colleagues, Sebastian Georg and Sebastian Kube, decided to study this is that they had people come into the lab and sit down at a computer and type the letters F and J, F and J, F, J, F, J in an alternating fashion. And they asked them to do that for 3 hours. 3 hours of typing F and J, and they said, do the best that you can. The control group was just instructed to do the best they can, and then of course they track a large group of people through this process of do the best that you can. And then they brought people into the lab and they said, we're with one condition, we're going to pay you money. We're going to give you $10 US. And we'd like you to do the best that you can. And then in the second condition, they asked people to do the best they can. And in exchange for doing their best work, they would be rewarded with these water bottles. And in the third condition, they were told, do the best that you can. And in exchange for your best work, you're going to be rewarded with a piece of origami. And what they found was that as we might expect, that a little bit of incentive actually does have a positive effect on performance. That over the 180 minutes that they were tracking these FJ experiences, and what we're seeing here, this curve is the frequency in which they're typing the letters FJ. Is that the cash actually provided a positive influence on performance to the tune of about 5%. By the way, some of you might be noticing, if you're familiar with the goal gradient effect that was studied by Ron Kivitz and Itamar Simonson, that we tend to increase our productivity as we approach the goal, but then there's just a slight fall off towards the end, which was replicated exactly here in this particular scenario. I'm just forgive me for geeking out on that. Okay, so the money, the extra money actually provided an incentive, this extrinsic motivator. In the second condition, the water bottle provided a significantly larger increase in performance than just cash, and certainly more than just do your best. So we find that as an extrinsic motivator, the water bottle, which was a utilitarian reward, something very practical, actually had a very positive effect. But most interesting in this, the origami. My gosh, I still revel at the data, because it's so crazy to think that a piece of origami, which for those of you who are deep lovers of origami, I mean, no offense, but honestly, a piece of paper folded into something that is useless but very attractive, but still useless, and increase performance by 30% over the baseline. And what we come away with, and this is replicated in study after study after study, it reinforces the idea that we are not so in touch with our what actually motivates us to actually drive forward. And something as hedonic, something that brings us pleasure and is luxurious, or something that we wouldn't buy for ourselves as a piece of origami, ended up becoming the most extrinsically motivating reward in this particular setup. So the conclusion is, ladies and gentlemen, rewards matter. They matter a lot. Then the question is, since my study with Dan and Francesca was about through the impact of rewards and the impact of goals, we have to ask, do goals matter? And George Lowenstein at the Carnegie Mellon University has referenced this particular piece several times, and I just love it, where a group of researchers took 6,888 marathons between 1970 and 2013, and totaled them all up and looked at their performance based on finishing times exclusively. They also looked at 10-kilometer, half marathon, 30K, 40K, a wide variety of ranges. But in this particular aspect, they were just totaling up the marathon data, the 26.2 miles that was completed. And so this is an interesting thing, that when we have such a large data set where there were almost 10 million finishers to these marathons, we would typically think that we would see a curve that is relatively evenly distributed. That it's fair to imagine that while given the human condition, we're not able to complete marathons in under 2 hours just yet, but given these 9.7 million finishers, that we would see a relatively even distribution. But that's not what the researchers found. What the researchers found was a curve that looks like this. While we could construe this as saying, well, it's relatively similar to a simple distribution, there are some things about it that we should point out, like these spikes around 3 hours, these spikes around 4 hours. Why do those spikes exist? And it actually helps us to understand it when we overlay the time, and we see that there are a large number of people. If, let's say, we look at the 4-hour time completion for the marathon, we're looking at a lot of people who wanted to make sure that they were just under 4 hours rather than being over 4 hours. So there's a very large number of people in the few minutes leading up to the 4-hour mark, 3 hours and 50 minutes, 3 hours and 55 minutes, etc., leading up to 4 hours. But at 4:01, 4:02, 4:03, a very small number of people. And that's because they were willing to push themselves to get across this very imaginary but very important goal that they had. And so we come away with the fact that goals, even outside of the workplace, matter a great deal. And of course, this gets replicated at 3 hours, 3:30, 4 hours, and there's also a relationship to the law of large numbers, right? That we're looking for these nice even numbers. I'm sure that there were some people that said, "I want to finish at 3:35," or "I have a goal to finish at 3:37." That's entirely possible. But it's much easier to set a goal to say, I want to finish at 3:30 or finish at 4 or under 4 hours rather than 4:10. It's a distinction of honor to be able to say, I finished it under 4 hours. So these goals matter. That's the important thing. Now I'm going to start talking about the case study here in just a moment. But in order to do that, I need to describe a particular tool that was developed by a company called BI Worldwide, which is a company where I worked up until about 4 years ago. And it's a fantastic organization. It's an agency that does work around the world with companies to help them in employee engagement and sales incentives. But we developed a tool called Goldquest, and in the United States, it actually has patent protection. But it's important to understand how this works in order to talk about our case study. So I'm going to take just a minute here to describe that in sales incentives, the reward setup for Goldquest starts with a baseline of productivity. In other words, a run rate or an anticipated level of performance given someone's past performance. The baseline is calculated as as an average of the past 6 months of activity for every individual on the team. So it's an individual baseline, it's an individual measure of productivity, and it's based on an average of where that person has been, taking into account seasonality and things like that. And then level 1, then there's 3 levels from which the participant, the salesperson or the person in the call center, can choose from. So if they performed at their baseline of activity during the promotional period, during the period of the program, which was 30 days, by the way, there would be no reward. But they could choose a level of performance above and beyond their level of baseline activity. If they chose level 1, in this case, it was about a 10% increase over their baseline. And if they chose level 1 and achieved 10%, they would be rewarded in a point system called award perks. It was a non-monetary but fungible media that they could exchange for things like merchandise or travel type rewards. If they selected level 2, it might require as much as a 20% increase. In fact, it did require about a 20% increase in performance over the baseline. But they would get 3 times the number. So if they were getting, I think they ended up getting about 10 award perks at level 1, they got about 30 award perks at level 2, and at level 3, they got about 60 award perks. And the equivalency was about I think the rewards were worth about $60, $120, and $240 or so. Now, the interesting thing about this particular model is that if they selected level 2 and said, well, I'm going to be striving for 20% over my baseline, if at the end of the program they came in at 19.9% over their baseline, they would receive nothing. They would receive 0. It was a complete goose egg. So they got nothing. The penalty for not achieving your goal was 0 reward. Also, there was also no reward for overachieving. So if they chose level 2 and they said, I'm targeting 20%, but through some windfall, they were able to achieve 35% over their baseline, they still would only be rewarded at level 2 at the 30 award perks, not at the 6x award perks. So there was really no incentive to shoot low and then achieve high, nor is there an incentive to shoot high and achieve low. So I wanted to set that up because we used this model, this tool, for the goal selection and with this telco. So now we've been asked by a global telecommunications firm to help figure out why is it that they are having trouble getting their employees more engaged. So with the help of Dan Ariely and Francesca Gino, we set up a 2x2 matrix. We, pardon me, excuse me, just a moment. Thank you. From the 16 call centers in the United States, we pulled 2 high-performing call centers and 2 low-performing call centers, and set them up in such a way that with this 2x2 matrix. We call the active rules, or the active rules here are named for the fact that we were asking those people in the active rules conditions to select their goals in Goldquest, to use the Goldquest methodology. In the passive rules, we use the same model for rewards, 10%, 20%, 30% over baseline with 1x, 3x, 6x rewards, but did not ask the participants to commit. In the passive rule structure, they saw what the rewards would be in exchange for the amount of effort required, but they were not required to select. They were not required to make a commitment to that. They were only made aware of the goals and the rewards that could come from it, but they didn't have to make that pre-commitment. So in call center 1, the call centers were relatively similar in size with a similar number of coaches. And by the way, the coaches were, to also describe, the reps are the actual call center employees who are on the phone talking to the customers of the company. And the coaches are the first level of supervisors. that are supporting the call center employees. So who are talking on the phone. The coaches are the first level of escalation when it comes to challenges or trouble. And so the coaches are deeply involved in the success of the call center overall, and also with the program itself. So after a 1-month study that was done, by the way, during 2009, the heart of the recession in June of 2009, when things were pretty bad in the United States from the financial crisis. We measured the results. We set up the data looking back over the past 6 months. We ran the program for 30 days, and under these particular conditions. Oh, I think I failed to mention that the 2x2 requires Goldquest in call center 1 and call center 2, and then the passive rules. In other words, the same effort and rewards in call center 3 and 4, but in call center 1 and 3, if we're looking down, call center 1 and 3 were rewarded with these award perks, with these points that people could exchange for merchandise, things like slow cookers and bicycles and binoculars, relatively modest but potentially luxurious items. And the call centers 2 and call center 4 were rewarded with cash, so they got money in their paycheck at the end of the month, and they were used to getting this. By the way, they were used to getting cash, but this was going to be in addition to anything that they were able to do. So how did this turn out after the conclusion of the month-long effort? When we looked at it by the award type, so this is answering the question, do rewards matter? This is the question, do rewards matter? What we saw was that in the 2 call centers that were rewarded with merchandise, they were 43% over baseline. The groups the group call centers 2 and 4 that were rewarded with extra cash actually performed under their baseline in general. And the control group, which were the remaining 12 call centers, a couple hundred people that were there, they were rewarded, or they resulted in about 4% under their baseline. So what happened there is a slight fall off from what we expected the baseline to be. And statistically speaking, we would say that this is flat. They're really, I don't think we should get hung up. Actually, we shouldn't get hung up on any of the numbers specifically, but just think about it in merchandise had a very favorable effect, cash had a mildly negative effect, and the control group was basically flat. Now, when we split the numbers looking at the group that had to commit to their own goals, the active rules, they were significantly over their baseline across both the merchandise and the cash groups. And compared to the passive group, which saw the same rules, saw the same amount of effort and the same reward, but did not have to make the commitment in Goldquest, they were about flat. I think, again, 7% under baseline would be considered relatively flat. There was very little change in their activity, and especially relative to the control group, which we spoke to before, that was relatively flat. If we looked at it by specific, so here we can say, do goals matter? And I think that we can absolutely say that goals matter. So we certainly see that the data supports the idea that the reward, the extrinsic motivator, matters, as well as the commitment to a goal matters significantly. And then lastly, if we look at this on a call center by call center basis, there was a significant difference. That the group that was required to commit to their goals, the active rules, and was rewarded with merchandise, slow cookers, bicycles, umbrellas, binoculars, things like this, they had a significant improvement over their baseline compared to the group in the lower right that was 35% under baseline. These were people that were rewarded with more cash than they've ever seen before, but did not have to make a commitment. Their production actually sank. And we can talk about the rationale behind this and why people might have performed this way. But the key takeaway here, I think, is to be reminded that we are not so good at deciding what our own motivations are. That when we are presented with something like a list of rewards that include slow cookers and binoculars and bicycles, in exchange for a commitment to work harder at my job, that I'm much more likely to respond positively to that and achieve the goals that I've set forward, compared to when I'm just being given more cash to do basically more of the same job. It becomes a much more calculative kind of experience. So with that, I want to leave you with a couple of thoughts about what call center leaders can do to engage their people with the knowledge of behavioral science. And that's really what happened here, is that we have the opportunity to apply behavioral science to the workers who are on the front lines of the call center work. And so the first thing is that call center leaders can help their employees by helping them set their own goals. And this can be, there's a lot of literature. Gary Latham and Ed Locke, the founders of goal setting theory, discovered very early on that a joint exercise with management in goal setting can be a very powerful experience for employees. The second thing is that call center employees really need meaningful rewards. That these are people that in the US at that time were making on average about $45,000. Now that's not poverty level by any means. That's still a good wage, but in the U.S. But it's also not a luxurious wage. It's not even close to what Kahneman and his colleagues found to be the $75,000 mark, where the more money you make, the less impact it has on your subjective well-being. $45,000 is an average wage, but a lower wage, and so more money should have meant more to their motivation. However, the fact that the rewards were hedonic and luxurious, they could be shared socially. People could talk about, they could go home with a new slow cooker or a pair of binoculars or a bicycle and talk about it. And that social value that they derive from that is incredibly meaningful. And then, of course, context matters, right? The interesting thing about this tool is that it increased friction. It actually caused people to slow down, not use their system one thinking, but use their system two thinking, and get into, okay, what do I want to do? If I'm going to have to choose a level, if I'm going to have to choose a goal level and an effort level that needs to actually be pretty close to where I think I'm going to land, I have to think about my abilities and my opportunities during the next month. How much better can I do? What effort can I put forth to actually earn this particular reward? And so increasing friction caused them to slow down. But then, of course, there's also the decreasing in friction, which we're so used to hearing about. Leidy Klotz's Subtract and Jonah Berger's work certainly says that pulling things away, Roger Dooley's friction, reducing friction can also get us to do a lot of good things. In this case, counterintuitively, increasing friction ended up having a very positive effect. So with that, I want to turn it back to Matej, and I want to say thank you for hanging in there during this discussion, and I look forward to taking your questions.
Thanks a lot, Tim. And let me come back to the point you made at the very end about friction, and especially about increasing friction. Why do you think it is that when friction goes up in this very specific scenario, people are more likely to stick with the goals and to achieve the goals? Is it does it boil down to the principle of commitment and consistency, as it was described by Cialdini a long time ago, that the more active and public the commitment is, the more likely we are to stick with it?
That's a really good question, Matej. In this case, the commitment was not a public commitment. It was a private commitment that the only person who knew was the call center employee who was actually making the commitment. However, I think that a lot of it comes to this fact that when we're challenged to make a commitment, and it's an all or nothing, right? In this case, if they missed their commitment by just 0.1%, they would get nothing for their reward. people thought about it more, and that caused them to get out of a system one, super quick. Oh, I'm just going to, check a box here no matter what. And it caused them to get into some system two thinking and really reviewing, how can I improve? What can I do? Is it possible for me to go from my current run rate, which they were presented with this, they were told this is what their run rate is, and can I go 20% more? Could I go 30% more? And that cognitive load that they had to experience, I think, was a really key part of, as you mentioned, commitment and consistency to the commitment that they made to themselves, and of course to the reward that was waiting for them only if they achieved or super achieved their target.
Because the more I think about it, the more it seems to me that for commitment to work, it should be public, which it wasn't in this case, but it should also be active. It must be an active commitment, and basically the more effort and thinking I put into creating the commitment and committing, maybe the more likely I am to do all I can to fulfill it. And how did it actually end up? Did the company end up using these results and adjusting the reward system and the goal setting system?
Matej, I am so glad that you asked that question because Dan and Gina and I were on the phone presenting the results to the leaders, the people that were responsible for all 20 call centers in the United States. And we got done with presenting the results and felt like we'd made a compelling case. And there was a long pause of silence. And then this woman came back and said, well, we're not sure if we were clear, but we have a culture of cash and just telling people where they need to be. And basically said, whatever you found is fine, but that doesn't match our culture. And she went into a lengthy discussion about how she was happy that we did the work, but didn't agree. She did not agree with our findings from a cultural perspective, which we failed to take into consideration. And then the follow-up call with Dan, I remember getting on the phone with him and just saying, how could they not just to completely endorse this? This was done perfectly. We had great results, and to show how they could improve their performance within their call centers. And Dan just said, don't you know, Tim, people are irrational. It's a response I'll never forget. So no, they didn't act on it, not at all. They buried it, and that's why you'll never see this published. Unfortunately, I share it as a result. But unfortunately, we weren't given the go ahead to use the data in publishing the story.
Well, thanks for sharing anyway. By the way, please feel free to write all the questions you can think of into the chat window. We'll come back to them a little bit later on. But Tim, don't you think this is what you just described is a great lesson for consultants, also for behavioral consultants, that it's not only about what really works and what brings results, but there's so much more that you need to take into consideration when coming up with solutions. And I think that's why in order to be a great behavioral consultant, it's by far not enough to be a great researcher or to be a great academic, because that only takes you so far. But it definitely doesn't make you a good consultant.
It does. You teed this up perfectly, Matej, that we are in many ways fighting two forces. That as a consultant, you need to deliver a result that is appropriate and relevant for the client. At the same time, I was certainly compelled by doing good research and wanting to make sure that the research was sound, that we tested things that were relevant and meaningful. And I think that in the end, in this particular case, we could have crafted the study to focus on things that were going to be more culturally relevant for this organization, and come up with results that might have been easier for them to act on. Really, would have been my hope. So Dan wasn't concerned because he's a researcher, but I certainly felt the tug and the pull of these two very different motives or objectives of serve the client versus serve the literature, serve the research. And I do regret that we didn't tailor the study in such a way that the client could have benefited from the research and actually helped improve the performance of their call center employees through something that was more culturally relevant.
Because I see it from my own experience that very often clients struggle with accepting what we tell them, with accepting the results of experiments that we run, simply because they are sometimes counterintuitive. And when we talk about rewarding people, about cash versus other kind of incentives, the common sense tells us, give people cash and they will perform better. And time and again, it turns out that it's simply not true. There have been so many studies which have shown that motivation through cash only is not really the right way to do it. And it can actually, as your experiment showed, decrease the performance. So why is it that businesses have troubles stepping out of their, let's call it, comfort zones, where cash is the only incentive?
Gosh, we need a whole hour for that, let's say, right? But we know that that our confirmation bias is very strong. Our commitment to the status quo and our defaults in the way that we do business, the way that we're getting up and doing things on a daily basis are very, very strong. And the culture and context that a company builds over time becomes sort of an engine of it in and of itself. You've done a lot of work with, or some recent work with call center organizations, haven't you?
Yes, indeed. And that was not a successful project because we probably didn't really take into consideration research like the one that you just described. And we've learned the hard way that when you want to make a call center more effective, to increase conversions and so on and so on and so on, it's simply not enough to create a great call script, because that's what we were hired for. So here are our call center agents, and help us redesign the call script so that they sell more, so that the conversion goes up. And we did it. We constructed a new call script and actually several versions of the call script. But it didn't bring the results that we expected. And then when we dug a little bit deeper into what was going on, we figured out that there was simply so much human factor involved that simply tweaking a call script won't be enough. Because if you have a demotivated person, a demotivated call center agent, you can give them, the best call script on earth. It won't help them, because the motivation and the willingness to perform and to go above and beyond is simply not there. And so we went back to the managers, and we told them, look, guys, it didn't really work, and we think the reason is that or the reasons why it didn't work are hidden somewhere else, not in the call scripts.
That reminds me of some work that Gary Latham did in call centers in Canada, and they were looking at using specific call scripts that they had tested, and wanted to find out if the employees in the call center could be primed to perform better by the use or by the inclusion of a watermark of a winner, of a woman crossing a finish line, like a marathon type thing, breaking the ribbon at the finish line and holding her arm up in the air with victory. And in half the cases in the control condition, there was no watermark with the script, and the same script in the test condition that had the watermark, and found that over and over and over again, by the simple presence of the watermark, those employees actually delivered 32% more productivity. They were actually more effective in their jobs just by having the watermark of the winner. So there are, and that tiny little context thing gets to the fact that if we aren't taking a look at the broader question, as you said, Matej, we've got a great script, but if we don't have a culture that's going to support it, then what does it matter? If we don't have a culture that supports the idea of rewarding people based on goals that they choose, and then it's not going to matter. So we always have to be designing within the context and the confines of the environment. I think that that's a big challenge. Or have leadership agree to do something above and beyond, right, where they are. We need to have leaders, be willing to accept counterintuitive results. And that's always a challenge, isn't it?
Absolutely, absolutely. We have a couple of questions popping up in the chat. But before we go to the questions, let me take 1 minute to tell you about something that we're planning. You might have heard about it, and it's InsideBE. InsideBE is a new initiative where Tim, among others, is also taking part as a partner, as an expert. So what will InsideBE basically be all about? Think about it as Harvard Business Review and Coursera of behavioral economics in business. So basically, we want to create a place, a hub on the internet, which will be full of case studies from business, case studies from the brightest minds out there, full of online courses, very specific how-to guides and reports. Because what we found out, and you have been telling us these feedbacks, is that there's simply not enough focus on behavioral economics in business. How do I take all these theoretical insights and how do I apply it in my business, in my own work? And this is what we want to change. So we've spent the past months speaking with so many different experts, Tim being one of them, Jess Groom, Nir Eyal, my colleague Christina. They all will be sharing their case studies, their insights on the platform. And there are many more. I didn't have the banners ready, but Nuala Walsh, I know you're watching now. Nuala will be also sharing some of their insights. Of course, Rory Sutherland from Ogilvy, Sam Tatum from Ogilvy, Richard Shotton, and many other big names. So if this sounds interesting, go to InsideBE.com. We're launching in just a few weeks. Enter your email and you will get 2 months membership for free on the platform. So now coming back to you, Tim, and to the questions we got. So here's a first question from Fabrice. Hi, Tim. Thank you very much for your presentation. As the founder of a behavioral design agency, I always have problems explaining my services and the power of behavioral science to my clients. Do you have a tip how to bring such exciting results as you just presented to potential clients?
Fabrice, I wish I had a super golden answer to that. I really do. I struggle with the same thing. Virtually everyone that I talk to struggles with the same thing until they come up with a specific product. For instance, my podcast partner, Kurt Nelson, is great at framing his behavioral design agency in terms of improving corporate communications. So he starts with, he has a tool to do an analysis, to audit important corporate communications, specifically around sales incentive and performance incentive communications, about how to write the rules and how to communicate the rules to sales employees. And so he starts the conversation by saying he's a communication agency that focuses on on sales and performance incentive communication. And that, while it is extremely narrowing, it leads him into discussions that are very broad. I unfortunately suffer from starting very broad, and that that makes it very difficult. I'm sorry, Fabrice. I don't have an easy, super easy answer for that.
Well, if Fabrice, you don't mind, I can share our experience. And for us, the only and the best way to get clients excited is to very briefly show them very specific results of either our work or someone else's work, which are related to the problem that a client is facing. There is simply no better way. Once you show results, you've got them hooked, and they will listen. If you don't show results, don't show concrete case studies, you will struggle. And again, hopefully InsideBE can help with that as well, because it will be full of case studies that anybody can take and use. Another question, Tim. Hello, Tim. Thank you for the presentation. Can you explain more what you mean by friction, please? Thank you.
Happily, friction is a word that has been occasionally in the use in behavioral science for the last 15 years or so, but it was popularized by Roger Dooley in his book Friction. And Roger Dooley is actually an engineer by training, but has become completely fascinated and engaged in the application of behavioral science. And what he sees so often is the increase in friction when it comes to trying to get people to do things that could be very easily, but with the increase of friction makes things difficult. The decrease of friction then tends to increase our ability to get things done quicker. By way of example, the Save More Tomorrow model that Shlomi Benartzi and Richard Thaler came up with, where people opt into their company's corporate savings program, and the default is to increase your savings rate by 1% every year for the next 10 years, and that's a way of reducing friction. Amazon is a great example of reducing friction with their one-click ordering. They take all of the effort and the friction out of the ordering process by reducing it, all of those activities of name and address and payment methods to one click. And so those are great examples of reducing friction. I might also call attention to Leidy Klotz in his new book Subtract is a great way of thinking about pulling back barriers and reducing effort in our world to actually increase behaviors. And he does a great job of talking about Kurt Lewin's force field analysis, which I won't go into, but that's my first thoughts. Matej, do you have any other thoughts about friction?
Well, basically friction is everything, we define it as everything along the customer or the person's journey where they have to do something. So any kind of effort they need to do in order to achieve something or get from A to B is basically friction. And so the general rule of thumb when Daniel Kahneman was asked, so what is the best way to make someone change their behavior? And Kahneman said, make the desired behavior as easy as possible. And that's, it sums it up very nicely. So just make it as easy as possible. Perfect. And the funny thing about friction is that it's, as everything that you talked about and what behavioral economics is all about, it's basically how we perceive things. It's very subjective. And that's why also friction can be very subjective. And basically at the end of the day, what is important is how the person feels about what they have to do. Do I feel it will be difficult? Do I feel like it will take up half of my day? And at the end of the day, it doesn't matter if the process is objectively simple, if subjectively I feel like it's really difficult. So basically, what we always advise our clients is to decrease the perceived effort or the perceived friction. Do you work with the perceived effort and the perceived friction as well, Tim, in your projects?
I do, because oftentimes, for instance, I did a project with a pro-social organization in Colorado. They were trying to get families of runaways to adopt the free available resources that were made for them, but their uptake was pretty low, and so it starts with, why are people doing what they're doing? Like, we have to start with an ethnology of why are people in these situations where their child has run away, and they're being presented with a lot of free available resources to help them, counseling and that sort of thing, but they're not taking it, and then develop. And what we found in this particular case was that the families typically did not trust the law enforcement people who were offering these free services. There was a lack of trust, and so and the messaging was actually being delivered by the law enforcement people. So when the police officer was at the family's home of the runaway, they were handing them a sheet of paper that said, "Here, the police recommend that you do these things." And so by changing that from changing the same resource offering to the communication method to coming from a social worker and coming in a slightly different form that was just more bullet points of, here are all the free options that are available to you, grouped in ways that were easy to digest, then the uptake of those free services actually increased by more than 30%.
Mhm.
So there was actually no change in the offering itself. It was just a matter of who was offering it, and the messaging in the offering itself
Mhm.
allowed people to perceive, this is better for me, even though the actual effort was still the same.
This is the power of the messenger. It's so fascinating to see that by changing the medium, or by changing the messenger, you can shift people's preferences, behaviors, decisions. Fascinating. So there's another question, Tim. Hi, Tim. How could one bring people to make active pre-commitments with themselves for specific goals they want to achieve on later point in time without having them write these goals down? In other words, is it necessary to have a written statement of the goals one wants to achieve?
Well, I'm not sure. I'm not sure if you have to write it down or not. There is some sort of pop literature around the idea that people who write down their goals are more successful than those who don't write them down. And I'm riffing now. I don't have literature to back me up on this, but I do know that people who make plans are more likely to achieve things. So having a goal in and of itself probably isn't enough, and writing down just a goal is probably not significantly better than simply thinking about a goal. But writing down a plan gets you to start thinking in ways that Annie Duke talks about, doing a pre-mortem. That when we start thinking about, well, the way to get from where I am to my goal is going to require me to do these certain things. And as I'm writing those things down, if my mind were also asking, what could get in my way when I need to get this done? And how am I going to deal with that? This pre-mortem kind of model could actually help us be more likely to achieve the goal. So I'm not so sure if the magic is in just writing down the goal itself, but maybe writing down the plan. And that's a very powerful thing that there is a lot of good literature on. Matej, any thoughts about that?
Yeah, and I would maybe come back to what we already discussed about the principle of commitment and consistency, that in order to make it more powerful, the commitment should be active, and that's writing it down, for example, and should be public. I think it's much more powerful in this specific case if the person in question doesn't write it down, but talks about the commitment with someone to make it public. And I think this is one way of making it more powerful. And what you've been talking about is so true, because time and again research has shown that creating the so-called if-then rules, in other words, plans for specific situations, is a great way to overcome the hurdles which might stand in the way and to eventually get to the goal. Tim, another question from Ruth. Hi, excess friction is definitely something our services NHS struggle with. Our main barrier is organizational culture. Any tips to explain confirmation bias and status quo bias to senior colleagues? Thanks, Ruth.
I think Matej answered the second part of that question perfectly, because it's about giving examples. I like to start conversations and presentations with large groups of people who believe themselves to be very rational. This might be engineers or accountants in particular. I like to start with little games that are like optical illusions. When we use the optical illusion as a metaphor for thinking about our cognitive illusions, and then giving examples as to where confirmation bias comes in their own lives. And in the United States, it's people are relying on cars all the time. Everybody's got a car. And so in the United States, I'll just say, well, did you find yourself, when you bought your last car, noticing as you drove it off the lot that there were a lot of other cars of the same make and model as you had, but you didn't notice those, 2 weeks before? And they're like, oh yeah, of course. And it's an availability or a confirmation kind of heuristic. And so when they get to see that these illusions, these biases, these shortcuts that they take in their decision making are, in fact, that they're influenced by them and they're common, then they start opening up to the idea of, okay, maybe we could do something. But I think it goes back to what Matej was saying. It starts with giving an example of this is how it works in the real world. Matej, thoughts about that?
Yeah, I think the strategies to overcome the confirmation bias and the status quo bias are very different, first of all. So when it comes to the status quo bias, I think you need two main ingredients. You need a sense of urgency. Why should I do it now? And the second thing you need is to, and we talked about that already, is to lower friction. So to make the change feel as easy as possible. And I think these are the two parts of the puzzle which you have in place. It will be much easier to get someone to change something. When it comes to confirmation bias, it is a little bit more difficult. And honestly, I don't have a strategy for overcoming the confirmation bias.
Because it's hard.
Yeah, really hard. And one last question. Hello, how would you say the role of emotions play out? I seek to specialize in affective science. So how else should I broaden my interest to other aspects when applying to practice?
Well, the first part of the question about how emotions play out is that I think emotions are involved in almost all of our decision making. I think David Laibson believed that, did some studies at NYU about how emotion plays a prominent role in something more than 70% of all of our decision making. That less than 30% is really non-emotionally organized for most of us, most of the time. Again, there are absolutely different situations. So how does it play out? It's just there. It's like air or water to a fish. It's always around us. And in order for us to counteract the potential risks that come from, and by the way, emotion's great. We need emotion. So I don't want to do that. But in our decision making, if we're going to act more rationally and behave more rationally, we're going to have to be aware that the air is around us all the time, and then think of ways, and then look to the literature for ways to counteract that. The second part of the question, broaden your interest in other aspects when applying to behavioral science. Follow your curiosity. If I'm answering this correctly, and please forgive me if I'm not, but I think just follow your curiosity. I've spent a fair amount of time interviewing grad students in PhD programs, and on a wide variety of topics. And in almost every case, the wonderful thing is they're following their curiosities. They read a paper, they noticed something in their own life, they noticed something with a friend or a neighbor or a family member that made them question, well, that doesn't seem right. Why would they be doing that? And that led to their field of study. And I think that that's a great way of getting started, to have that intrinsic motivator to say, I'm curious about that and I'm going to follow that. Matej, how would you respond to that?
I love what you just said, and I would quote Rory Sutherland to, and I guess we'll have to stop there. What Rory says is that not everything that makes sense works, and not everything that works makes sense. And
Yes.
that's the essence of what we do as behavioral practitioners. We test stuff which at first sight might not work. So Tim, thanks a lot for being here, for the amazing presentation, for answering all the questions. And I very much hope that we'll have plenty of opportunities to talk again and to welcome you here in our webinar series again. Thanks a lot.
I'm looking forward to it. Yeah, thank you very much, Matej.
Take good care, and have a good day, have a good evening, have a good morning, wherever you are in the world. Take care and see you soon.